Could you give the Futures Thinking Network your name?
Dan Holloway.
And what do you do?
Oh, good grief. I'm Head of Administration at the Faculty of Linguistics. I'm the CEO of a creative thinking company called Rogue Interrobang, and I research early modern taxonomy and the creative imagination.
What comes to mind when you think about the future?
Bleakness, heat death. So also lots of interesting questions about how we connect to the future and how we connect our ideas of purpose and agency to the future. In particular, for example, thinking about the cup of coffee that I can see Chelsea has over there, I might really want a cup of coffee. I also know that in a trillion, not doing my Brian Cox accent, years, we'll end up at the heat death of the universe and there will be nothing. And both of those seem like trivial connections to the future. Yet there is somewhere between those two where our purposive connection to the future somehow becomes meaningful. And so it's where those parameters lie that's really interesting to me.
So we're asking people to share things with us
Cool.
that have helped them think about the future. Could you recommend us anything?
Okay, let me start with, it's a work of non-fiction. It's probably something that people won't have read because it's one of the most difficult reads you can find. It's Larissa McFarquhar's book called Strangers Drowning, and it's a set of case studies from the effective altruism movement. Effective altruism, obviously it's quite big here in Oxford because we're home to the Effective Altruism Centre, the UK branch. It's a really interesting philosophical movement which seeks to look at all consequences of all our actions completely dispassionately, treating all sentient life the same. So when we weigh up our actions, considering the consequences of those actions on the suffering of sentient beings, sort of literally ad infinitum before we make any choices. It's deeply problematic because obviously it's a consequentialist system, it's very computational, it's very impersonal, but it also forces us to face really, really important questions that we otherwise wouldn't face, in particular about identity, about our tribalisms. It makes us question our exceptionalism, which I think is one of the big problems we have with the future. And it makes us think, going back to what connects us purposively to the future, it makes us think about why I might want to do something that will benefit people I know or things I care about, as opposed to people I've never met. Hence the title Strangers Drowning. So that would be my first recommendation. Not an easy read, not necessarily a read I agree with, but a read that's really important for anyone thinking about the consequences of their actions. So, we talk about a work of fiction. It's really, really interesting. As a poet, I wanted to pick some poetry, but I couldn't actually think of any poetry that made me think about the future. So I'm going to go with a short story, just for a change. It's a short story by Brian Aldiss, who obviously is a science fiction writer, and it's called Odd Hundreds, and it's part of a collection called The Romance of the Equator, and it was the first thing that really connected with me emotionally about the future that I'd read. It was a really interesting way of thinking about questions of legacy, of how you want to be remembered, of what your essence is. It's also just really, really moving. One of the things that will come through with a lot of these is that I'm a real sentimentalist. Video, film is really difficult. I spent my whole student life in the 90s in the Phoenix cinema, doing nothing but watching French cinema. I want to choose two. I want to go with the fiction and the non-fiction one again, just to cheat. And the fiction one I want to recommend is Krzysztof Kieślowski's Blue, which is the first film in the Three Colours trilogy. It captures two things about the future. The first is it's utterly dystopian. It starts with a character who loses literally everything, and everything she doesn't lose in an accident which changes her life, she gives up, or she doesn't so much give up as destroys. And it's the idea about how you can create something beautiful from something nihilistic. It's an important part of someone's toolkit when you're thinking about the future. So the other film I would recommend to anyone, it's another French film, much more recent, which is Man on Wire, which is the story of Philippe Petit's tightrope walk between the Twin Towers, just before they were opened in 1973. And it's one of those films that seems to deal with something that's humanly impossible, and that's something I find interesting, thinking about the way we have got ourselves into trouble with thinking about the future is a lack of imagination, and a lack of imagination about what is possible. Something to listen to. Really, really cliched. Again, it's one of the very first things that ever connected with me, and everyone knows it already, and that's Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot, which is like one of the most amazing recordings ever. It made me want to fill people with wonder about the possibilities of the future. And Sagan has this, again, it's like with Blue, he has this wonderful ability to take something utterly nihilistic and turn it into something remarkable, sort of the fact that we are alone and utterly alone with nothing. And he turns that into this magical possibility. It's utterly remarkable.